Hello, Gary. Thanks for joining.
Hi, Meena.
Good morning. Hello. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining this webinar session. Wishing each and every one of you a fantastic 2021. I see we have several folks rolling in, so we're going to go ahead and get started today. I'm Meena Sankaran, founder and CEO of KETOS, and I'm joined here by Gary, who is just a brilliant expert in terms of all things water. And you can learn a lot about his background and everything that he has worked on in terms of being a principal at OSIsoft and over the years of decades of experience, both domestically and internationally in the sector of water. And we would love to get to know a little bit more about the audience and folks joining here today. So if you could take maybe a minute of your time, we're just going to launch a quick poll here, and I'll send a reminder for those folks who are just kind of jumping in a bit later. But you've got industrial, agriculture, and municipalities. And as you're thinking about your sector and segment in water, would love to hear from you. And so please take a minute and sort of just plug in what your response might be. So as we kickstart this new year, a topic that's traversing a lot of organizations has been Water 4.0. And as much as I'm not a huge fan of buzzwords or acronyms, this terminology might actually carry some weight for a lot of people who are here in the call today. And it forces you to look inside your business from an outside lens of, well, what does digital transformation mean to me? And how mature are we in the digitization journey of water within our own space? What best practices can be applied by analogous industries? Or what are some aspects unique to only my organization that I need to cater to? Or how can I fund these initiatives, and do I have the right people to implement such a vision? And some folks might be a lot more, sort of foresighted in terms of how far along they are. And some folks might be, sort of listening, observing, being that sponge and taking all that information to essentially, learn from other deployments and apply. Whatever your risk appetite might be, I think there's a lot to learn, there's a lot to explore. And several markets in today's world operate with 100% digitization of their assets with predictive infrastructure as well as transformative business models. And so there's a lot to learn and apply into the world of water, as we surely aren't the first. I'm delighted today that we have an esteemed guest, Gary Wong, joining us at our webinar cooler chat today. And for those folks who have never joined us before, welcome to the KETOS Water Cooler Chats. And so, Gary, one of my, quick question, first one would be, with your background working at OSI, which is one of the companies with an enormous exposure to several verticals like transportation, energy, oil and gas, far beyond just water, what are some of the patterns you're seeing that are emerging and repeating itself? And what are some of the trends that you think the audience here would really appreciate and sort of have an insight into from your experience?
Sure. Well, Meena, thanks for having me on. This is fantastic. Well, first of all, we have to look at the full value chain of water. So not only is it a vertical unto itself, but it's also plays a massive role horizontally. Like you say, for example, in oil and gas, in mining, in breweries, right? And we can talk more about that, as well as, municipalities and so forth. But it's all about the journey. You talk about digital transformation. Like you say, some companies in this world are completely digital. No, that's not the case with water. It never will be. We're not going to automate everything, but absolutely, it is a journey, and we have to start somewhere, and we have, right? So a lot of the organizations, for example, in municipalities, of course, in the industrial companies, they have things like control systems, automation, SCADA type systems that help them in that digital journey, right? But we're definitely seeing, further trends going forward.
And in those, as you're thinking about the different verticals, do you see certain verticals more sort of, having that affinity to adopt it faster than some others? Any applications that you think tend to be sort of the low-hanging fruit or a least resistance to getting the organization moving towards adopting?
Yeah, like one we see commonalities in certain themes, regardless of industry. For example, condition-based monitoring is one of those because a lot of organizations have many assets and they want to get the most out of those assets. So, it could be, different assets that they're looking at. So if you're looking at a water, wastewater municipality, it could be a lot of pumps and a lot of their pumping stations. And they're asking questions like, when's the next time I should service those pumps? What are the efficiency of those pumps? Those types of questions, as opposed to just doing periodic maintenance. Every 6 months, run out there and maintain those pumps. They might not have needed any type of maintenance at all, or maybe they've already, failed. So, condition-based monitoring is definitely one of those that extends across, any industry that we're seeing.
And, when from a keto standpoint, what we're learning from the industry obviously is, a small portion of the visibility and the exposure that OSIsoft sees across the verticals. And when we're looking at, are people really adopting the journey of real-time intelligence? How important is real-time water intelligence even to certain industries? Does it make more sense in certain applications versus the others? How are you receiving that data and that response back from your customer base, especially because OSI's Pi solution is completely based on time series data. So I'm very curious how that flow has happened in water compared to, the other verticals where you've been doing it already over the last decade.
Right. So, in general, as an industry itself, water is a bit of a laggard when you compare it to some industries like oil and gas, or even mining, for example, where they've already started their digital transformation years ago. But in water, if you take a look at it, organizations have been talking about sustainability, but the pandemic has really highlighted the issue of resilience. So whether it's resilience of a municipal water or wastewater utility, ensuring safe, clean drinking water, or treating all the wastewater, it applies to the same thing in the industrials. For example, a mining company, they need water as an input, and there's also a lot of wastewater as an output in their process. At the same time, they're trying to maximize, for example, if they're a gold miner, the amount of gold they're extracting out of the ground while meeting all the environmental compliance regulations and so forth, and using the least amount of water. So if you look at all that, through resilience, and we went through and are still go through a pandemic, unfortunately, but it has really kind of, in a way, shone the spotlight on especially utilities, I want to say. And I kind of look at it as the have or the have-nots, in a sense. The theme of remote monitoring is a big deal. And that means there's a lot more sensors that are being deployed. And those sensors not typically connected up to their SCADA or automation system. There could be standalone, and there's fantastic solutions, KETOS, for example, with water quality. Those sensors are out there, and it allows organizations to see what's happening out in the field without physically having to be there. And with the pandemic, the haves were able to remotely monitor and take care of their operations in real time from their home or from anywhere, that's safe and comfortable, as opposed to the have-nots where they actually had to physically go on site. And of course, with the pandemic, it's a health hazard. And then sometimes people would have to be mobilized for a week or two at a time on site to manage operations. So that's definitely one major trend. Going to the cloud as well. A lot of the data, there's solutions that are out there, as a service type solutions, that data goes directly to the cloud, right? So now you're starting to see more of a hybrid model where you have solutions on premise, data on premise, and then of course you have data that's up in the cloud. So it can be quite a challenge for organizations to manage that data and start making sense of it.
Yep. No, absolutely. They're, very insightful, and most importantly, I think I would also resonate. It also resonates in terms of mining when you mentioned we're hearing from a lot of like the uptick with electric cars, and what people are probably not correlating is all that lithium mining that's happening. How is that impacting the need for water and how much water is being used in that process, and also from an effluent standpoint? So we're definitely seeing a strong uptick in effluent monitoring, and discharge monitoring needs to become more real-time focused, and purely from a core process control, not necessarily even from a compliance standpoint, because that's certainly a plus. And more so also looking at how do you apply those data-driven decisions into your own operations to become more cost efficient, especially with the pandemic, and also how you look at being, looking at your entire TCO for every single infrastructure decision that you're making, not from a short-term standpoint of next 18 months to 2 years, but really looking at how does this influence our infrastructure overall and the operations for the next 10 years. And municipalities certainly are always looking at a 20-year horizon if, industrials are looking at a 5-year horizon. So there's a lot of variations in terms of how people are certainly applying to that. Now, another terminology that you may have seen floating around that now folks in water are really diving into thinking about is DaaS. So, data as a service. We were recently debating its definition and its importance of also realizing, what does it mean? What does DaaS mean for a utility operator versus what does it mean for an industrial CIO? And is it the same? And what is the readiness for an organization to accept a DaaS model when they've traditionally been, in such different structures within their organization, and it might be a lot harder to kind of shift gears. What are some of the best practices you've seen, Gary, in terms of, and also some metrics? And I think I have some metrics I can share here while you're kind of, sharing your thoughts about DaaS around how it's getting adopted in your customer base.
Yeah, so data as a service, like a lot of these terms, the definitions can be very broad. Yeah. Right? And it could mean different things to different people. So, having data available is really important. We also did a survey at OSIsoft last year to over 200 utilities. And one of the things that was a really eye-opener was that 61% actually had issues accessing their data. So when you talk about DaaS, now you have the ability to provide data that's useful to a CIO, to an operations manager, in a form with context that they're able to leverage very quickly, really to drive action, to make a decision based on information. So that's really important. But I also think, as I'm looking at the water industry in general, I think where the industry really needs to go is more what I would just say, like solutions as a service. So having data is important, absolutely. But if you take a look back at if 61% are showing challenges with accessing the data, DaaS will definitely help.
Yeah.
But then again, because we are going forward with a hybrid model with data sitting at the edge, right, on premise and in the cloud, now you have 3 different areas where you can have data being generated. So, integrating all that data to make it meaningful with the right context is really important. That's not only for people, but also for, we hear a lot about artificial intelligence, machine learning, and so forth. So AI and ML is definitely here to stay. It's kind of interesting because back in the 90s, when I was doing my undergrad, part of it was in artificial neural networks and machine learning. So I kind of dropped that for many years, but it's kind of, as these things turn around in circles and go around, it's really great to see this. But those systems need data. A lot of times aggregate data and data that has context. There's got to be some kind of meaning. So because it's all about pattern recognition. So DAS is absolutely there to stay. It's important. We need the data with the context. But I think, for the industry itself, we need more solutions. So package up a solution where I can look at, all my water quality or all my leaks, in terms of metering, or I'm looking at monitoring all my my effluent, for example. I know, for example, what's coming in, so upstream into the plant, downstream, and so forth, where I can see a bigger picture to, really make those decisions that I really need.
No, fair. And I think we've all heard, from, if we're not listening to the utilities, the fault is on, us as technologists. And the users are definitely saying they're very data rich, but information poor. And I think that's what you're alluding to, where utilities, several of them, have a vault of data. It might land up being in PDFs, end up being in spreadsheets, and some of it might be online, but it's a combination of different data collected over different sensors in different formats, and some more relevant than others, while they might be also lacking generation of some crucial data that's missing. At least from a KETOS standpoint, I think to share maybe one bit of how we have seen DAS, just for the audience here, if you're not familiar with KETOS, we look at it as a very integrated solution offering, very similar to what Gary mentioned, where ultimately we believe the customer is paying us for those actionable insights to manage and use that data-driven decision-making for transforming their business. That's what the goal is. So look at it as an integrated stack where you have the hardware, that those are your sensors at the edge. And all of those can be, distributed or centralized depending on what your infrastructure architecture allows. You have all of the bidirectional communication happening from that edge to the cloud in a secure manner, encrypted, and having that robust platform and a layer of analytics on the top with actionable insights. And now think of this entire stack serviced and maintained for a predictable flat service fee. That's how we look at, you can call it insights as a service or infrastructure as a service. There's a lot of words to coin in terms of how it applies to you, but that's how we see it, because such a model seems to be well received in a way where there's $0 CapEx. And Gary, you might agree to this, or, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. The data ownership is a very, very critical piece in the entire model of analytics for the utilities and the industrial as people are looking at it. And we believe that the ownership of the data has to be with the customer, even if you're in a SaaS model or a SaaS model. And time again, this is a question that's popped up is, do I need an IT person? Do I own the data? And is this communication to the cloud secure? And while people are getting very excited, there's still that resistance. Should I just use on-prem? Can you make that happen? Or should I do cloud? What does that restrict me from? So take a couple minutes, and what are some of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so data ownership, I agree with you. Absolutely, the data is owned by the customer. They should have access to the data at any time that they want. Now, we do hear a lot about security, but there's a lot that happens behind the scenes with data security. One, the data is anonymized. Two, there's very rich algorithms that allow for that secure transmission of data up into the cloud. But maybe a lot of people don't realize that when they hear about the cloud and, oh, my data is going to the cloud, we deal with it every day. You know, every time someone buys something online, they've transmitted their information up to the cloud, right? And you compare that to, say, you know, we used to use, you know, we still use credit cards, say. How is a credit card any more secure when you use it at a restaurant? Well, when we're able to go and eat at restaurants, for example, and you hand the card over, that card, your information can be easily copied right there manually without having, you know, any kind of going up into the cloud. So, you know, there are very secure protocols with the data itself that goes up to the cloud. And I think, again, the pandemic has really accelerated the adoption of some of these technologies.
Right.
Because you compare it to, you know, they might have a firewall in place where they're locking all this operational data down on premise, or it only sits on the controls system side of the fence. So no one gets access to the data. So that's not going to really help us in terms of remote monitoring or during a crisis, right?
Right.
So, you know, with the adoption of the cloud, I think it's inevitable. We're seeing more and more, and you know, security should not be an issue. There's people that are completely dedicated to that. And there's also thinking that, of course, the flip side to that is that organizations solely just think about security, and that's all they do, as opposed to trying to have our internal IT departments manage security,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because we only have a finite and limited number of resources,
Yeah.
right? So that, I think that's really important. You know, when it comes to, you know, do you need IT people? You know, IT is always going to be involved, absolutely. But in terms of using the data and taking action from the data, absolutely not. I think the data from DAS, as an example, is fed to the decision makers and the people who know the business. And that's the whole point around this, right? Is providing the context with the data, so it's information that the people who understand that information or need that information can take the necessary action.
No, they're great points, Gary, because I think the other aspect, a question that popped in the Q&A over here as well is, you know, data quality is an issue. And there's so many disparate sources of data that are coming from, you know, multiple locations of just legacy investments that utilities have done. And at least I truly believe that for any company, as a technology company, to be successful in this space, you have to be interoperable. You're not going to come into a field as a brand new greenfield infrastructure and expect an all or nothing environment. You have to be thinking of how are you going to pull the data from other sources, help clean that data, because that's such a time consuming, laborious exercise that, you know, probably is budget constrained for many utilities. And the second part of it is how can you also push the data out from your platform into maybe a homegrown environment or another platform that's another hierarchical platform that is of preference within a utility, like, you know, OneWater or OSIsoft, or, you know, you have Siemens MindSphere and so many other VMS systems that are out there. So I think the, you know, ability to interoperate and maybe allowing for that integration of the disparate data sources is super crucial. And this is something that OSI does really well.
That's right.
You know, curious about how you've become that glue to kind of tying the value added service of information across sources, and how do you see that translating for sensors like KETOS, where we're able to provide you that water quality because we're generating data that doesn't exist today, and then that gets assimilated into sort of, you know, the way you're looking at the platform and its value offering.
Right. So, you know, OSIsoft, we specialize in this. We've been doing this for 40 years. It's our 40th anniversary. And, you know, it's all about operational intelligence. And you're right. It's, you know, we kind of bridge the gap between the operational world and the IT world, the OT and the IT world. And there are a lot of disparate systems out there. So, you know, our Pi system is completely out of the box that is able to talk to all these different systems. So hardware systems, software systems, and be able to bring that all back into a single source of the truth is what our customers like to say. And with the new sensors, for example, KETOS, I think that's really important because there are areas that we cannot see before,
Mm-hmm.
right? In this case, it's water quality. It could also be, you know, for example, in sewers where you don't know exactly what's happening there at all. So with these sensors, we have the ability to talk to, for example, like KETOS and the sensors that you have and bring that back as well to provide that bigger picture. But not only that, you know, because we talked about the edge on premise and the cloud, that creates more complexity because there's now 3 areas where data is being generated. And that's, you know, where something like OSIsoft and the Pi system, you know, provides that end-to-end integration of that data. And of course, we have the ability to pass that data to other systems or people, right? Because so, you know, we're very good at the integration side of things, but there's a lot more organizations and smart people that focus on the actual application of that data, you know, whether you feed it to a third-party neural network, or, for example, KETOS needs more data, say, from SCADA systems to drive those insights for customers. That becomes seamless. So it really comes down to looking at out-of-the-box solutions that are able to do this. And, you know, the challenge a lot of the times is, you know, people and organizations don't know these types of solutions exist sometimes. And, you know, that's kind of like our fault for not getting out there for doing the marketing and helping to educate. But that's when they, you know, might turn to traditional databases and try to build their own solution. And they soon quickly find out that it's just not scalable. Especially with today's world of complexity, where you have all different types of sensors, different organization manufacturers, and of course with, you know, edge on premise and cloud makes it a lot more challenging.
Yeah, and I think I would like to, you know, challenge the audience to think more about their own architecture in the environment and reflect on, have the decisions that have been made over a period of time been siloed in their approach of how they've looked at infrastructure versus have they been more holistic in how they've looked at it? Because I think the only way to consider a true solution for each of their environments is going to be a holistic approach of looking at a variety of different sensors depending on what specific data you need. And sometimes you may not know exactly which specific data is required and what's unaccounted for, right? And so that's also a critical piece of working with the experts, but remaining as the water expert and not having to become technologist. And I think that's really important, that as you're looking at solutions, as you're looking to bring in new solutions, look at interoperability, look at integration of data, look at services that allow you to grow and adopt other new technologies as things evolve, because this is always evolving. And also remember, as you're designing your architecture, you have to look at both the ability to integrate your historical data, but also be able to assimilate net new machine learning algorithms as your applications. You start with one application. It has to be very organic in how those other additional applications kind of roll into overall architecture, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's about being future-proof in a way, but best of breed technologies and solutions have the ability to interoperate, right? And you're right, there are going to be new and different sensors, and we have to be able to integrate all that. And you think about, at OSIsoft, and we kind of take a look at data sharing as well. So not only within an organization or across their enterprise, but with other entities. So if you take a look at water and you really look at the value chain of water, let's start with, it could be a brewery that requires water, right? So they need to buy water. At the
Right.
same time, the interconnection with that is the water needs to be treated and pumped, right? So there's electricity that's involved. That's, that's a whole water energy nexus, right? That's another topic for another day. But to be able to share data now allows us to be able to, for example, use less water, ensure the water quality is better, use less power, for example, right? So it's a great cycle that we can start to look at, and we're starting to see more and more organizations starting to share their data to be able to, be more sustainable.
Yeah. Now, I think we can go on and on about just a variety of these topics and really diving into, some of these in a lot more detail, because we're barely scratching the surface here. But we're very limited on time in these talks. And our goal really is to plant some seeds, and hopefully you feel intrigued enough to want to learn more and explore further. I'm very grateful to have Gary's time today, and I know how busy his schedule is, so really appreciate your time, Gary. And for the audience, please feel free to reach out to Gary or me for any further conversations and details you would like to know. We're all in this journey together, and the goal ultimately for us is to, make water as a really sustainable, safer, smarter resource for our future generations to come. So with that, have a great rest of the day, everyone. Really appreciate all of your time. Take care and safe.
Thank you.
Stay safe. Thank you.